Welcome back to the writing room. Today we're going to discuss something very important when it comes to character and when it comes to writing in general. Now, if y'all have followed me for a while, you've seen my video where I responded to Matt CMG, and he said it best when he said that this phrase that we're going to be talking about is thrown around very liberally and without fully understanding what it is. But seeing as we're here to discuss character building, and I've seen far more of these things pop up and far more frequently, let's go ahead and break it down. Let's discuss the Mary Sue, and I'll help you understand how not to create them. So this video is going to kind of be a two-parter. The first part, we're going to talk about what constitutes a Mary Sue, what makes one, because I think there's a lot of debate about that, but we're also going to talk about how to avoid writing them in your story. So to start with, I made a video in the past discussing this, but I want this to feel a little bit more official. I also want to build on a previous point. Matt CMG in his video brought up the dictionary definition of a Mary Sue, which was not wrong, but I would say not quite complete. The definition states, quote,
a type of female character who is depicted as unrealistically lacking in flaws or weaknesses.
And yeah, that's a fine starting definition, but it leaves out a few things. Allow me to fully and completely define a Mary Sue. So bear with me, this is going to get detailed. You can actually break it down into several steps. A Mary Sue is a fictional character for whom the plot will always bend the knee. That's the first thing. Now, normally they are female, but there are male equivalents that we call Gary Stews. We'll get to them a bit later. The Mary Sue has various traits and or symptoms that easily identify her as what she is. So for one thing, they'll often be free of any hindrances or weaknesses that she must overcome with any degree of difficulty. All of her obstacles will be easily overcome and there will be no weakness to hold her back, at least not one that's going to be meaningful to her character. Secondly, she will possess strengths and attributes that put her unrealistically above her peers, despite not having worked for or earned them in any meaningful way. Most of the abilities or achievements of Mary Sues are not done by hard work or by struggling, but naturally. They're just powerful because they are special. That's going to be the phrase you hear a lot from me. Mary Sues are powerful because they are special. Most Mary Sues will not have training, nor will they be trained by someone in the course of their stories. If they do have a trainer, it's usually just someone to tell them how special they are. They usually don't do any active training. More on that point, she will be the topic of admiration and adoration for the characters who are on her side, and she will be the target of disdain and scorn for any and all antagonists. You'll quickly notice that when a Mary Sue enters the scene, every character will suddenly treat her like she's amazing and special, sometimes without any knowledge of who she is or much of it, or have any meaningful relationship with her. The antagonist, despite what goals or plans they had before, will suddenly make the Mary Sue the new focus of their plots because she is just so dangerous to their plans. She will ruin everything, even if it's not established why she's a threat. She just is, and we need to stop her at all costs. Again, she's special, and the plot knows it, thus the characters will sense it. Thirdly, the decisions she makes, even the poor ones, will always lead to a beneficial outcome, and any criticisms made against her are by those who do not understand her and will always turn out to be wrong or unfounded. Any character who disagrees with the Mary Sue or is in opposition to her will always end up being wrong, regardless of whether or not they make sense. They turn out to be wrong, ignorant, or secretly evil. Now, bear in mind that detail. They will always end up wrong. Doesn't matter if you think that what they said makes sense. Doesn't matter if it fits within the world or not. They're just going to be wrong because the Mary Sue must be right. Even if the criticizer makes perfect logical sense and you as the audience see their validity, it doesn't matter. The Sue must always be correct. So to counter this, the critic will come off as pompous, jealous, unlikable, power-hungry, or bitchy. Even if they aren't the primary antagonist, we're not meant to like them. We're meant to see them as outliers who just can't accept the Mary Sue for how special they are. And finally, the last symptom that we often see, they are, in short, an anomaly. They are the plot hole within a world of consistency. They are perfect, but will proclaim that they are not. They do not suffer any real character growth or loss. A Mary Sue rarely changes over the course of their story because to do that would imply they had any real room to grow in the first place. The only real growth a Mary Sue can face is them realizing they're more powerful than they believed at the beginning. Either they realize they have a chosen one destiny, or they realize that they have secret power no one else had access to. Not by training, mind you, but by convenience. They can't suffer loss, at least not on a permanent character-changing basis. A Mary Sue might begin their story saying how they lost their family in an accident or a murder, or they might say they've lived on their own for several years in harsh conditions or in unfair circumstances. But that's not really loss, for it is all part of the recipe that makes the Sue just so special. You don't see her sad backstory as growth, you see it as sympathetic. Feel sorry for the Mary Sue, won't you? They've had to endure so much. They deserve to be special, don't they? Which leads to the ultimate sin of the Mary Sue. But we'll deal with that a bit later. So the next big question comes up. Where did this all come from? What is the origin of the term Mary Sue? Where do we get it? Well, the term first began with fan fiction, and rightfully so, because the first Mary Sues have always been self-insert characters, written mostly by adolescent female writers who want to insert themselves into the universe of their favorite fandoms. From what I gathered, it began with a woman writing herself into a Star Trek series, making her character, named Mary Sue, the most beautiful and talented new cadet of the ship. Though brand new, she was able to achieve feats of skill and knowledge that baffled the crew, won the affection of James T. Kirk, and the admiration of the entire crew of the Starship Enterprise. She did nothing wrong and always seemed to succeed despite any trouble before her. She was more beautiful than any other female cadet on the ship, and ever since, the term has been used to apply to any female character that meets that criteria in any form of medium. Now, let me make this abundantly clear. Self-insert characters in fanfiction is fine. You name it. Naruto, Supernatural, Star Wars, Attack on Titan. You pick it. I've seen a fan fiction of it where someone inserted themselves into the story to live out their fantasy. And why not? We all have a fantasy to be amazing, don't we? If someone told you that you could be the best that you could be in the world of Star Wars or Naruto, would you settle for anything less than the best? Would you settle for any girl or guy other than your chosen waifu or husbando? Of course not. You want to live out your chosen fantasy. So I'm not criticizing fanfiction writers for wanting to write out their fantasies. I myself have done that before with my own stories, like The Tale of Tomiki, a story about a Saiyan who lands on an alternate Earth with mutants, demons, and the Justice League. It's all fanfiction of sorts, and it's certainly silly nonsense, but that's fine. I think it's okay to partake in that kind of fun from time to time. However, it's when the Mary Sue steps into original storytelling that we have a problem, and unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more of it frequently. Twilight, The Hunger Games, the Star Wars sequels, Captain Marvel, and yes, to some extent, The Legend of Korra have all taken sips from the Mary Sue Kool-Aid. Some are certainly worse than others. Some are so trite and hated for their Sue qualities that they are panned by the general public, while others are only semi-Sues, possessing a few Mary Sue qualities but having enough of an identity and character growth as to not fully meet the label. But now it's time for the ultimate question. Why are these characters bad? What's wrong with the Mary Sue protagonist? That's something that I get asked a lot. If this character's a Mary Sue, fine, what's wrong with that? It's now time to explain the sins of the Sue. There are three major ones, and I will explain them as best I can. Sin number one, the Mary Sue is boring. Mary Sues don't really engage with their audience or their reader because they exist outside the scopes of the plot's limitations. What other characters struggle to do, they can do without seemingly any difficulty or challenge. While some threats can cause galaxy-level disasters or world-ending cataclysms, the Sue can confront these dangers and emerge victorious and better for it in most regards. While most characters will struggle with a moral or tactical dilemma, they will always have the right answer, and anyone who disagrees will be wrong. At first, the Sue's achievements may come off as cool or badass. We like to see really awesome characters doing really awesome things, but after time passes and we don't see the Sue struggle or try, we begin to get angry at her. We're bored by her. We no longer feel invested in her successes because we don't believe they were earned. We no longer feel like the threats facing her allies or herself are real threats at all because she will not lose. Superman, for example, was always very boring to me because he could overcome any obstacle with ease. No real threat is a match for him, and the limits of his powers are inconsistent depending on the medium he's in. I was far more invested in Batman, a human with clear limitations and weaknesses, as opposed to Superman who, in one movie, could fly around the world so fast he reversed its spinning and somehow reversed time so he could have a do-over. It's boring. I want characters to struggle and learn because in doing so, I feel more invested in their journey. If the character is already at their peak from the beginning, I have no interest in following their journey. A good contrast to this would be someone like Saitama. We talked about him in an earlier video, but I have pointed out that he's a Gary Stu, a character who never loses. And that's true that he never loses, but does he lack conflict? No, he has conflict, but it's all internal. Saitama is struggling with his reality that he's losing his emotions, his ability to engage with others, and his drive to continue being a hero. He has ultimate power. He can beat any monster with a single punch. But in exchange for power, he gave up something important to being human. And we're invested in him not because of the villains he fights, but because of the interactions he has and the trials he confronts along the way to maintain his humanity, his ambitions, and his relationships. The Sue needs not be boring because they are powerful. They simply need to be engaging. Sin number 2. The Mary Sue is manipulative. Mary Sues lack any weaknesses, but they will try to convince you that they do have weaknesses. The Mary Sue quite often tries to play up the idea that they are not special. They are the girl next door, the new kid in town, the outsider. They don't actually belong where they ended up. They were just dragged into it. They try to convince everyone around them that they aren't special or that they're just the same as others. However, as the story progresses, it becomes apparent that they are the most important character in the entire narrative. The good guys want her around and admire her greatly. The villains obsess over her, defeating her, or stopping her. She, like a planet in orbit, has everything rotating around her as she just drifts along with the plot. A good example is Bella Swan from Twilight. She just moved from Arizona to Forks, Washington, and was the official new girl at school, acting distant and reclusive purposefully, only instead to be the object of attention for most of the guys and the girls at the school, already being included in just about everything and eventually becoming the subject of attention for Edward Cullen. But more than this, the Mary Sue will manipulate the audience as well. The Mary Sue, as said earlier, is boring, but they must convince the audience to be invested in them anyway. To do this, the Sue has a cast of characters who are far more interesting and engaging than her, fawn over her and engage with her. They obsess over her, and in doing this, they convince the audience that they are important by proxy. The mentality is, if everyone in the world she inhabits thinks that she's amazing, then surely she must be. It's a phrase that ER use, and you will hear me use it even more in this video. They are powerful because they are special, not the other way around. We assume the reverse when it's not the case. The Mary Sue wants to convince her audience that she is a good character and that she has drama, growth, and goals, but she never does. Her drama comes from a tragic backstory that she has no control over, but just adds more sympathy points for her being around other characters. Her growth is just her being told by others how amazing she is, or discovering being handed powers and abilities on a silver platter that she almost never really earns and that allow her easy victories. And her goals are simply doing the right thing, and I've already had a long conversation about why that's an arbitrary goal, because it will always be right objectively. She will never have a moral dilemma of whether something is right or wrong. She just knows the right thing to do regardless of anyone else's input. In this way, she's a gifted manipulator of the plot and of the audience. Give Cora credit. At least she opened up her mouth with, "I'm the Avatar and you gotta deal with it." She wasn't lying to me. But there is a caveat to this. Think of it as a Sin 2.5, where the Sue can ruin a franchise they exist in. This isn't the case with all Sues, but usually Sues that are planted in an existing franchise. The Sue, through their ease of accomplishments and lack of struggles, can make pre-existing characters seem less valuable. Why are we invested in the Avengers movie Alien Invasion when Captain Marvel could have annihilated them all quite easily? Why are we invested in Luke Skywalker learning the ways of the Force from Ben or from Yoda, or his lacking dueling skills when fighting Vader, when Rey was unlocking Force powers right out of the gate without any training and was able to beat her first dark side warrior without dueling experience? Why should I find Aang's learning the 4 elements at such a young age impressive when Korra was bending 3 of them as a toddler? Even if the Mary Sue can logically or plausibly achieve these feats, they lead us on to the third and final sin. Sin 3. Worst of all the sins the Mary Sue can commit, the Mary Sue insults our intelligence. There are some people out there fully willing to defend Mary Sues. They jump out of their seat at the mere suggestion a Mary Sue is not amazing or perfect. If you don't like a Mary Sue, you're either sexist, a chauvinist, or you didn't pay attention to the story, or you just can't handle a female lead character in fiction, or maybe it's all of the above.
I don't buy the Mary Sue thing anyway. I find the term sexist in itself. Okay.
These people are exactly the kind of ignorant individuals the Mary Sue needs to survive. They don't think rationally and are willing to drink the Kool-Aid so long as it's in the name of their Sue. But for those of us with a rational mind and a willingness to fairly criticize characters, we see the Sue for what she is. We see the flaws in her design. We see that she breaks the world that she lives in without any adequate reason. However, we are demanded and expected to accept it. Despite the obvious flaws in her character, we are expected to simply shrug it off and say, "Oh, she's a good character." But the Sue is a fragile thing, despite her supposed strength and independence. If you challenge her character or criticize it, notice how quickly they shrink back and hide behind, "But my backstory," "But these mean characters will always question me," or, the more popular choice, hide behind the audience who refuse to intellectually discuss the character they are watching. How dare we demand better of our protagonists? How dare we demand consistency and limitations to keep us invested? And in the end, the Mary Sue is a goddess masquerading as a normal girl. We see the goddess in disguise and call her out for what she is, and her devout cultists will rush to her defense because her character simply can't do it for her. So, now that we've talked about what the Mary Sue is and discussed what's wrong with them, in your own stories, how do you avoid it? How do you avoid the Mary Sue character in writing? Well, there are a few steps, and as you write your character, check back on this brief 4-part checklist and see the following questions. Ask yourself these questions. Number 1. Does my character's powers, traits, or abilities have limitations? A character must be limited to some capacity. Even if it's not in power, it has to be in character, emotion. Like if you had a character who could, like Saitama, kill any monster or enemy with just one punch. Okay, their power isn't limited. What is? In Saitama's case, he's limited because he's starting to lose joy, anger, emotion. He no longer feels joy in fighting monsters. He no longer feels like it fulfills him. He's not doing it because it's the right thing to do. He's doing it because it's a hobby, and that hobby is getting boring because there's no challenge. That's interesting and funny. What happens when the hero becomes bored of being a hero? That's unique, that's different, and it does provide a degree of conflict. We're interested in seeing Saitama grow. Number 2. Does the plot work for my character or against my character? Mary Sue's almost always have a plot that works to their benefit. Things just tend to work out. In Star Wars, the sequel series, Rey just happens to find BB-8, just happens to find the Millennium Falcon, just happens to press the right button that releases the Rathtars to save Finn, even though it wasn't what she intended to do, but it still worked out in the end, just happens to fix the Falcon's problems, and so on. If things just consistently keep coming up roses, there's a problem. Suffering is just as much a part of a character as is success. Number 3. Does the personality of my character feel engaging and dynamic? It goes back to what I said earlier. Mary Sues are not themselves engaging. They trick their audience into believing that they are by having the world treat them like they are. Here's an example. Pretend that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't wear color-coded gear. We all know them by their colors. Red is Raphael, blue is Leonardo, etc. But let's say that they didn't do that. There is no color-coded gear. They were identical. Based on their personalities alone, could you tell Michelangelo or Leonardo from the group? Probably. Michelangelo's the party dude. He's the one who's always cracking jokes and being silly, while Leonardo is the stern leader who wants to take care of everything and very rarely cracks jokes.
We can cut them off at 3rd and 1st. If we run like crazy. Is there any other way to run? Yeah! You guys are too slow. Hey! Springtime fresh.
Their personalities are distinct enough we can tell who they are and what they are about without effort. Now, let's switch that out. Let's drop Bella Swan from Twilight in a classroom without Edward Cullen, her boy toy, or Jacob, her second boy toy, or any of the other characters fawning her for who she is. Just drop her in a normal high school classroom. Would you even know who she is? No, she acts like any other love-obsessed teen. Nothing engaging about her is present. And then number 4. Is the character based off of you? If so, do they have your flaws? Sorry to disappoint you, but you're not perfect, guys. No one is. And because of this, you have flaws. And even if you want to write a self-insert character, you better be ready to engage with and accept some flaws of your own. Here's an example. One of my personal flaws is I tend to be very impatient at times. I don't like to wait for things. Quite often, if things aren't done quick enough to my satisfaction, I get very irritable. When I write a character based off of me, that is a very real flaw I possess that I could prescribe to that character. The difficulty here is we don't want to talk about our negativities. When we write about ourselves into a story, we don't want to write about the negatives. But sometimes it's understanding our negative traits that can help make the character feel more fleshed out, make them feel more real, more relatable. So when writing your character based on yourself, what can you apply? That's just all I'm asking. All right, and before we wrap everything up, let's quickly address the other big question. I said it earlier, so let's go ahead and get it out of the way. What about Gary Stews, the male equivalent? Are they just as bad as Mary Sue's? They can be, but the major difference that I notice between a Mary Sue and a Gary Stew tends to be that the Gary Stew is not powerful because they are special, but special because they are powerful. The YouTuber ER said as much himself. The Mary Sue walks out onto the scene and for no adequate reason starts gaining the attention of everyone around them. They reveal their abilities, powers, and traits, but they are already the subject of attention and affection beforehand. Gary Stews, on the other hand, tend to reveal their power, which grants them their special status. Superman did not gain special status until he established how powerful he was. Think of it like this. Everyone loves Superman. Nobody loves Clark Kent. Clark Kent is just your everyman, but everyone notices Superman and likes him because they recognize how powerful he is. But Clark Kent isn't getting love from everybody else, so clearly the character is not as beloved just because of who he is, but rather what he can do. Kirito from Sword Art Online, and yes, he is a Gary Stu, you can attack me in the comments for it later. He beta tested the game that he was in and was an avid kendo practitioner in the real world, thus his power and experience helped give him the special status he carries. It doesn't forgive all their faults, and there are certainly exceptions to this. Good examples of protagonists in harem anime, they tend to be Gary Stews because they tend to be perfect, or at least bland enough to allow the male watcher to insert themselves into the shoes of the protagonist. Harem anime is designed so that the male character is surrounded by women of different personalities, so that the male viewer can insert themselves onto the male protagonist and pick their favorite female and pretend that they're living out a relationship with them. That's the goal of the genre. But I can somewhat forgive this as well because, well, again, that's the underlying goal of the anime in the first place. Their point is to create a self-insert character, to titillate the male viewer and be a fantasy. But another big one I can think of is Doctor Who. There's actually a fantastic joke in the web series Edgeworld that demonstrates that problem with Mary Sue's and Gary Stu's perfectly. In this little joke, the characters Ed and Tom are watching a TV show, a spoof of Doctor Who called Dr. Y. And just watch the joke for yourself.
And now back to Professor Y. Oh no, Professor Y, the Galaxian drive is going to explode.
Don't worry, I just fixed it with my wrench, which is magical.
Oh, Professor Y, this planet is going to crash. What will we do?
Don't worry, we'll just escape in my space box, which is magical. Oh!
No, Professor Y, you've just been brutally murdered.
Oh, don't worry.
My body is also magical. Wait, are you being serious?
If you watch the scene, you recognize that in this scene, Dr. Y, despite whatever problem shows up, always has a solution that involves his magical thing or his magical body or something magical, and it's always out of left field. That's a great example of why the Mary Sue and the Gary Stu can annoy us. If every problem is confronted with a "don't worry," insert solution here, we have a problem. Sometimes you do need to worry. Sometimes you do need to care. Why? Because caring and worrying about the main character is called investment. And if you can't invest yourself in the character, I have no interest in continuing to follow the story. It doesn't take much to avoid the Mary Sue. Just some time to make your character real, engaging, and investing. And if you can follow some of those steps, you shouldn't have to worry about them. So I hope that this little Raven's Riding Room story, even though it wasn't little, it's probably my longest one so far, I hope it showed you what a Mary Sue is definitively, what sets them apart from the normal character, how to avoid writing them, and how to better criticize them when you see them. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in my next video.